Hello, everybody. What's going on? And welcome to 1000 Voices, where we are on a mission to interview 1000 inspirational Black Britons. Now, today's guest is Mac Alonge, and Mac is the CEO and the founder of the Equal Group. The Equal Group take a data-driven approach in order to tackle and improve diversity and inclusion with the corporations that they work with. In this interview, we hear more about Mac's story, his upbringing, and his life before starting the Equal Group. And it's very interesting to hear how these different experiences that he's gone through have weaved together and led to him founding the business that he's founded now. Mac shares with us a load of takeaways that we can all take away and apply to ourselves in whichever industry we operate. So whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're a creative, whether you're a professional, whether you're someone just wanting to hear an extremely inspirational story, then you're definitely in the right place right now. So without further ado, let's get into this interview. So this is 1000 Voices, and here we have Mac Alonge. Hello, good afternoon, Mac. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. How are you, Tevin?
I'm good. Thank you very much for coming to the podcast. Very much appreciated. I've been looking forward to this conversation, man. I love the work you and the team are doing with the Equal Group. So happy, man. Very happy to get you on.
Likewise. As I said, I think you and the team are doing a great job here as well.
No, thank you. Much appreciated. So what we always like to do when we start off is to start off, chronologically and look at your childhood. So just to begin and kick things off, can you talk about, just paint a picture of what your childhood looked like, your upbringing, and also have you got any insights into what role you feel your childhood has played in the person you are today?
Yeah, great question. So I was born in Liverpool, 1986, to a pair of Nigerian immigrants. So they came to this country in the 70s looking for better opportunities, better way of life. They were both well educated, both experienced in Nigeria, but when they came to this country they faced quite a hostile environment, and they were told that their education wasn't relevant here and that their experience wasn't relevant also, which if you kind of go back to the context of that doesn't even make sense. Nigeria was a British colony, so the education system was inherently British. The organisations that were running there were inherently British, so there's no reasoning as to why that would even make sense. But long story short, they re-upskilled themselves, both got UK experience kind of through fortitude and grit and determination, went back to university, got UK qualifications. My dad actually did a PhD in his field, which was town planning, and then embarked on various careers as well as raising kids. So I'm one of four. We've all grown up in this country and we've all been educated in this country. But my childhood, as I said, so I spent the first kind of 5 or 6 years of my life in Liverpool. Don't remember too much of it, but I do remember kind of a sense of community. I think Liverpool at the time was a little bit divided in terms of the African community as well as kind of the rest of the wider white British population. And it was where I experienced my first, I guess, instance of racism in the playground. So at the age of 4, I think a ginger guy came up to me and was like, made a comment basically about my skin tone, said something along the lines of your face is like chocolate or something like that, which was weird for me at the time, and I didn't really know what to say, didn't really understand it, but that kind of gave you a little bit of a view as to how early on you experience race and racism as a black person growing up in the UK. Moved from Liverpool to London, or South East London / Kent, at kind of 6, and grew up in kind of a very diverse community. So growing up alongside kind of Roma gypsies, Indian, Sikh, Hindu, Muslim, kind of people from all walks of life. And I think when you grow up in that environment, you kind of take for granted the fact that that isn't necessarily the norm for everybody. And being from kind of a working class background, you also don't realise that being working class or being in poverty isn't necessarily a great thing. As a kid, you kind of just know what you know, There are various experiences of kind of racism throughout my childhood as well, and I think that kind of shaped the definitely my formative years in terms of how I understood myself, how I understood my place in society, and I guess the contrast for secondary school, I went to a grammar school, which was in an area called Welling, which was kind of 5 or 6 miles from where Stephen Lawrence was killed. Stephen Lawrence was killed in 1994. I started going to the school in 1993, but the school was actually located in an area that was kind of well known for racism. It was previously the headquarters of the British National Party, and kind of racial tension was always a very present reality. So I remember growing up in that environment and kind of some of the things that you were exposed to, as well as the fact that it was a grammar school, I think gave me an insight into how kind of the middle class and upper class live versus how the working class live. But yeah, it was a very, very interesting upbringing, very varied in terms of that cultural dynamic between being deeply African within, or deeply Nigerian, deeply Yoruba in my house, and then kind of existing in this British working class, middle class environment.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I was going to say actually that it's a very sort of varied upbringing. We've grown up in all these different types of communities. You've got the Liverpool experience. I know you're young, but during your formative years, you've come to London. Now you're in a super diverse environment. Then you've gone to a school in Welling, the grammar school. I'm guessing, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm guessing that wasn't as diverse as the community that you were living in at the time as well.
Absolutely right. Definitely not. Definitely not.
Yeah, so it's interesting, all of these different backgrounds and experiences that that have contributed to who you are today. At that, when you was going to that school, you were younger, and it was a year before Stephen Lawrence's death, and there was all the racial tension there already. What was that experience? Do you remember what that period was like? Was there a shift or anything like that around that, 94 in the school?
Yeah, so I went to the school 3 years after Stephen Lawrence was killed. But obviously the investigations into Stephen Lawrence's death were protracted and unnecessarily so. But there was a kind of tangible sense of fear and kind of racism within that area, within that environment. So Welling is very close to Eltham, so Eltham's where he was killed, and Eltham was essentially for a lot of the time growing up a little bit of a no-go area. Like, you just didn't venture into that area as a black person. Like, what would you be doing in that area? And I remember there was an incident in my first year of secondary school where we were talking about, somehow got talking about Stephen Lawrence and the trial. I think it was in the press at the time, and one of the girls who was from Eltham said something like he deserved it. He was in a gang. And I just remember being like super angry at that statement, to say like there was this great injustice that had been done, and there was a feeling in some parts of that community that it could be justified, for a group of white guys to kill in such a savage way a young man, and to say that it's justified is absolutely abhorrent. So there was always that tension, and I think added to that, for me growing up, there was a very real sense of injustice in the way that I was viewed within a minority, within this kind of quote unquote elite school. Teachers demonstrating what now is, we'd term as racism, but back then as an 11, 12, 13-year-old, you don't really have the language, you don't really have the ability to articulate why you're being treated differently or why you're being singled out for essentially similar patterns of behaviour, similar levels of performance, or whatever it is. Kids are kids essentially. But the moment that there are differences in the way that certain behaviours are treated, we can then start to build up patterns in terms of what racism or structural racism looks like in that context.
Wow, interesting. That's nuts, man. Especially that comment, him being in the gang, whether he is or if he isn't, that has nothing to do with the fact that he was brutally killed, which is absolutely crazy. No justification or anything like that. Nuts, man. Can you talk? So after your upbringing, schooling experience, you've gone to work in the city. Uh, can you talk about what that experience was like, and how that has what's the word, inspired you to go ahead and found the Equal Group afterwards?
Yeah, really, really good question. And to some extent, this feels like a little bit of a therapy session, and a lot of respect to you for positioning the question. But I think it's kind of more of the same. So you grow up in an environment, especially my secondary school education, whereby injustice is like a common theme in the background in terms of being singled out and being made to understand that you're different. I think that palpable feeling of difference was something that I was definitely aware of going into the workplace. So as you said, I kind of started my career in 2008 in the energy sector. And the energy sector, for the most part, lacks diversity. I think I was, excuse me, really privileged to work for a smallish organisation. So at the time I joined, we were about 60 members of staff, but there were great levels of diversity. I remember joining and being one of, I think, 4 black men at the time, which for a team of 60 in the energy sector is pretty good. But then a lot of my role was industry facing, so I'd often have to go to meetings, cross-sector industry forums, and being the only black person, being the only ethnic minority sometimes, being the only person under the age of 35 at the time, being one of a few people that didn't go to private school or Oxford or Cambridge. And I'm not necessarily talking about just rooms full of like 10, 15 people. I'm often talking about rooms full of like 200-300 people. So it was very isolating in the early days. And then added to that, kind of when you look up above, I've always been one of these people that has tried to seek out mentors and tried to seek out people that are more experienced to gain knowledge and understanding from. And that was just lacking in the energy sector, so there weren't really visible role models that looked like me or people that I could relate to. And I guess the more I kind of went down that path in terms of energy consultancy, the more I realised that things weren't changing. So there's a dynamic sometimes that is expressed that, when you diversify entry-level positions, then that diversity filters up and over time you change things. I was probably seeing the opposite, where people would come in at entry level, they'd be from diverse communities, but then they'd leave within 2 or 3 years. And that isn't something that is sustainable, and that definitely doesn't add to this narrative around how we change things from a long-term perspective. So that was one of the things that kind of influenced me to start the Equal Group. The second was really around the work that I was doing. So my work as a regulatory consultant was really to help executive teams to understand the regulatory landscape, working with them to really use data in a meaningful way, so quantitative and qualitative data to understand where they were currently and what changes needed to be implemented going forward. So looking 5, 10, 15 years into the future to understand how to maximise their position in relation to the regulatory landscape. And I guess I looked around at kind of the diversity and inclusion arena, the industry, the sector at the time, and there really wasn't anything meaningful happening. There wasn't data being collected, there wasn't kind of data-driven strategies. What I came across was really shallow, really superficial, annual unconscious bias training and those kind of things. And I really had a sense that unless we change things from a data-driven perspective, things just aren't going to change, or even if things are changing, we haven't really got that critical ability to assess where we are now versus where we were last year, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, etc. So really data formed the core of what I wanted to do in this space. And then, in addition to that, it was kind of off the back of conversations I had with leaders that I had a really great relationship with in the sector to say, is this an issue that everybody sees, or am I being super sensitive based on my own lived experience? And it was something that everybody saw, but there was a little bit of a political fear in terms of not wanting to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. For the most part, these were middle-aged, middle-class white men, heterosexual, and also able-bodied for the most part. So there was a fear that because they don't have necessarily the lived experience to talk meaningfully about this, they felt kind of ill-equipped to do that role modelling or talking or visible advocacy for diversity and inclusion. And one of the things that I had kind of conversations with people about at a leadership level was to say, if there was more data, both quantitative and qualitative, that would then allow you to really speak to that data and to some extent take some of the emotion out of this, because I think this diversity and inclusion can be quite an emotional subject. But I think once you start talking about data, once you start talking about experiences, once you start talking about what it is that you're seeing, it allows people to talk meaningfully about that.
That's super interesting, and it's quite interesting to hear about how all of these different threads have woven together, which have led you to found the Equal Group. So we're talking about from childhood, growing up in that typically, Nigerian Yoruba household, you get that sense of identity from there, probably like even a sense of community, your household, maybe family, a bit of a wider community, and all of that. You've got that there, but then you step out of your house and you go to school, and it's a complete contrast, massive contrast. And then you step out of that environment and you go to a workplace, and again, you're not getting that same kind of community identity type feeling. You're one of only a few, and all of that. So it's interesting to see how all these different threads are woven together, and ladies have found the Equal Group. And something you said that was quite interesting towards the end there was how a lot of these people you're speaking with didn't necessarily fall into any of these diverse boxes. So they weren't they were able-bodied, heterosexual, middle-aged, white men, etc. They don't fall into any box, and therefore they're not comfortable talking about anything like that. How have you been able to get people who aren't as comfortable to talk about these kind of things to, one, talk about it in a very candid sense of yourself, and also are you seeing them now having these kind of conversations within their own firms or not?
Yeah, really good questions. I think the great myth sometimes around diversity is that there are diverse people and then there are people that aren't diverse, and the reality is that we're all diverse. When we start to unpick kind of the layers, so to speak, we understand our differences in terms of upbringing, likes, preferences, experiences, things that we've done, the things that we think about, the way that we naturally position ourselves. There's so many layers to it, and I think sometimes it can be quite restrictive in terms of the way people view things. So looking at things purely from a protected characteristic perspective kind of encourages people to put themselves into boxes that are very narrow and very focused around what are known as the protected characteristics, which is heavily linked to the Equality Act. But then when we start to talk about equality, diversity, inclusion in a broader sense, it allows people to really self-reflect and think about the things that the things that are true to them that can essentially either encourage or empower them to speak about diversity and inclusion in a meaningful and more holistic way. I think one of the great things about reframing diversity and inclusion is that it now becomes a responsibility for everybody to talk about it, a responsibility for everybody to start to notice who's in the room, who isn't in the room, when you're making decisions. And one of the great things that I often say about the energy sector, probably shouldn't have said one of the great things, I don't know if it's great, but it's one of the things I say all the time, is that we all consume energy, whether you're black, white, Latino, whether you're heterosexual, whether you're part of the LGBTQ plus community, whether you're able-bodied, whether you're disabled. We all consume electricity. We all consume gas to some extent. So why doesn't that thread follow through to speak to who has ownership for decisions and how decisions are made, or who crafts our regulations, or who looks at investment in the energy sector? Like, why is it that only a certain characteristic or demographic of individuals are involved in decision making, but we're all consumers? There's a clear imbalance there. So that's something that we have to rectify, and it takes all of us having these conversations to rectify it. The second half of your question was about kind of the way that things are being talked about within companies and across sectors. I think one of the things that I'm most proud of in the work that we do is that we don't just work with individual organisations, but we also work across sectors. Because, and I guess that links back to to my experience, to say, as I said, I had the benefit of my early years being within an organisation that was relatively diverse, so I kind of had a glimpse of the way things could be from a demographic perspective, but also from an inclusion perspective. But then when I left that organisation and went to other parts of the sector, I was, met with the sad reality that this isn't a diverse sector. And whilst you can have pockets of diversity in different organisations, or even different functions or departments of an organisation, if it's not widespread, that limits you from an individual perspective. So if I'm to move from a company that's great at diversity and inclusion to a company that isn't, you essentially take a couple of steps back, and you have to deal with things that nobody should have to deal with in terms of discrimination, microaggressions, and all of these other things that come with organisations that are typically not diverse. So as I was saying, one of the things that I'm most proud of about the work that we do is that we do a lot of cross-sector work, and that's really about encouraging the sector as a whole to deal with the issues that the sector needs to deal with, as well as organisations dealing with the issues that are more intrinsic to them as individual organisations.
Cool. What's the vision? What kind of a workplace do you want to see in the future?
That's an amazing question. So in terms of the vision, it's for... so our vision as an organisation essentially is to enable a business world without bias. So that means that where your chances, your opportunities, your ability to progress in an organisation has no bearing or no direct relationship to who you are as an individual. And that's something that we absolutely don't see in today's society. So we are well aware that if you are able-bodied, you have a much greater chance of success than somebody that is disabled. If you are white, middle-aged, middle class and male, you generally have a greater opportunity, a greater chance of progression than individuals that fall outside of those demographic characteristics. So the vision really is to unpick all of that, to create means for people to progress in a way that is not necessarily linked to who they are from a demographic perspective.
That's really cool. On more of like a general business side of things, what have you learned about running a business that you didn't read about in any kind of a book or watch in any seminar before you started this business?
That's a great question. I feel like I've truly learned that people are any business's greatest asset, and I think it's one of these things that is often said, and it's probably a ridiculous answer to your question, because your question is really framed around what I didn't learn in books, and it's something that everyone always says, everyone always kind of goes on about it, but you only really appreciate the reality of it when you start running your own business. I think to directly answer your question in a way that the question was framed, I don't think enough is said about how hard it is for you to run a business that... So I'll rephrase the answer, sorry. How hard it is to run a business when there aren't necessarily blueprints for the type of business that you want to run at the scale you want to run it. So I say that to say I am unaware of many professional services organisations or management consultancies that are run by black people or people of colour more generally that have hit, £20 million in turnover or £50 million in turnover or £100 million in turnover. And for an organisation that has those kind of targets and those kind of aims and objectives, we're essentially having to break the mold in various different places, from how we do things internally to how we're perceived in the marketplace. There is a very different narrative that is often portrayed about kind of what black people can and can't do. And I think the more you deviate from what is the stereotypical standard for your demographic, the harder it is, if that makes sense. And I think one of the things that is really positive about, I think, where we are as a society now is that we are starting to see more role models, and we're starting to see more visibility of people that are breaking the mold. So yeah, that's a really long and convoluted way of answering your question, but I think the just the lack of role modelling that is available for you as a black man running a professional services business.
Yeah, no, that's good. It's a good answer. Thank you very much. And so with you, so you started a business and there isn't necessarily like a blueprint to go off like that. How did you start it? Did you have to like seek out some mentorship or just, take information from here, information from there and just put it all together or something like that?
Yeah, so I guess I'm deeply privileged to have the background that I've had. So to have worked in the energy sector in consultancy firms, both from a SME perspective as well as a global organisation perspective, that's given me a really good insight into the way things work or kind of structures and processes that need to be established. But there's also elements of seeking out mentorship. So as part of our core team, from pretty much day one, we've had David, who used to be the CEO of the first management consultancy that I worked for. So he serves as our chair, but has been fundamental in kind of providing some of that mentorship and just a different set of perspectives and experiences that have provided a good balance over the years. But I've also been seeking out mentorship and kind of expertise from people that have been there and done it. And then, yeah, as you suggested in the question, there have been large elements of trying to piece it together as you go. So you take inspiration from podcasts or vlogs or formal education. And this is why I've got a lot of respect for what you're doing here, because the more people are aware of people's stories, that the more informed they can be and can tap into some of that knowledge and wisdom. And as well as seeking out mentors, I do try to seek out mentees. So who are people that I can pass my experience on to as well. So trying to be a little bit more visible as well.
Last question on this business side of things. If you were to give any piece of advice, like one major piece of advice to someone who's looking to start their own business, their first major business, what would that be?
That's a good question. That's a really good question. I think so. I'm gonna not answer your question. I will answer your question, but I'll provide a little bit of context first. I think one of the great injustices around entrepreneurship or business generally is that people have this theory that entrepreneurship is for everybody, and I think to some extent it has been glamorized by the media, and everybody looks at things like Dragon's Den or The Apprentice and has these rose-tinted glasses view of entrepreneurship and business. And I think one of the things that is so apparent, especially in the black community, is that we're great at starting businesses but not necessarily great at scaling and sustaining those businesses. But in direct answer to your question, I think that one piece of advice would be to really dig deep within yourself to understand what it is that you want to do and how much you're willing to sacrifice to achieve it. And I think those are two really important questions, because a lot of people want things but aren't willing to sacrifice anything to get it. And that is essentially not what entrepreneurship is about. There has to come a certain element of sacrifice, and I think the danger with the glamorization of entrepreneurship is that people don't highlight the sacrifice enough.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. So I've got some reflective type questions here. These ones might be a bit more difficult to answer. So with them, feel free if you need to take a second to think about it a bit or whatever. Feel free, take your time. But these are my favorite questions personally, anyways. So, all right.
I can tell by the way you're smiling and laughing that they're going to be really difficult. So
You said that it feels like therapy. If that before felt like therapy, this is definitely going to feel like therapy. So, yeah, let's go. All right. So, what's been the most important lesson you've learned in your life so far? What was your life like before learning it, and what's it been like after you've learned this lesson?
That is a wild question. So one of my favorite pieces of advice, and I was gonna say this in relation to the last question, but I'll say it now anyway. But one of my favorite pieces of advice is to not take advice, and it sounds really stupid, but it's something that I've clung on to, because I feel like people only give advice from their perspective, from their lived experience, everything that they've gone through. So that advice is always shaped in a certain way. And they can only give advice based on what their own understanding or their perspective of the world is. And it's something that I think Jay-Z said in an interview once, in terms of, when he was doing his music thing. I think one of his uncles said that, you'll never sell 1 million records, and he's like, I've sold 1 million records 1 million times. But for him, for the uncle as an individual, he just couldn't imagine it, couldn't perceive it. So yeah, I always cling on to that, not taking advice, or only taking it so far. What my life was like before that, I guess I was very trusting of other people's advice, trusting that they had the best intentions for me, or that they were experienced enough, especially when it came to kind of senior individuals or mentors that had been there and done that. Very trusting of their wealth of experience and their understanding of the world. What my life was like after, I have come to realise that to some extent everybody, like universally, is making it up as they go along. I've had the privilege of a year and a half ago, becoming a parent, and I think that experience shapes how you think about your own parents. To say, actually, there's no blueprint for parenthood, there's no blueprint for life. So taking advice is sometimes limiting yourself to other people's experiences and other people's viewpoints of the world as they see it, as they understand it.
That's really good. First of all, congrats on the parenthood. That's congrats, really congrats on that. And secondly, that piece of advice is really good, I think, because everybody is going to have their own opinion on how you should run your business and how you should live your life, on the decisions you should make. And a lot of these opinions can be conflicting. So that's definitely something really good to take on board. And I think sometimes, like you said, we can be a bit too trusting, and then that can take us away from our own path, what we should be doing. And yeah, it's not always best to take everybody's opinion on board. So that's really good. All right. Next question. What's been the most defining moment of your life so far?
Again, really good question. Most defining moment of my life so far. I think the decision to end my career in the energy sector and start the Equal Group. It was a decision that I didn't take lightly. It was, and again, comes back to what I was saying before about kind of sacrifice. Like, I was very, very, very comfortable in the energy sector, financially, in terms of my skill set, in terms of the work that I was doing, in terms of the trajectory of my career. Like, I would have been in a much better quote unquote financial position, potentially life position, had I stayed in the energy sector. But for me, and I think there came a point in time where I was really questioning purpose. I was really questioning what the legacy of my life could be. And I guess I came to the realization that my I don't feel like I was put on this earth to just sit behind a desk all day and make a lot of rich companies richer or rich people richer. I felt like there was a desire in me, or something that was placed in me to really right some of the wrongs that I'd experienced. And I think this is also why I really appreciate this conversation, because as I said, it has been a little bit like therapy to really reflect on the formative years, my educational experience, my experience within the workplace, and draw that common thread for you to say, and this is something that I reflected on at the time of making that decision, to say, I want to leave the world in a better position than I met it. So for me, it is a win if my son or my kids don't have to go through what I've been through in terms of racism, discrimination, and all kinds of obstacles and barriers that I've faced in the workplace.
That's it. Nice. If you could live one day of your life all over again, what day would that be?
Oh, that's a really good question as well. I feel like if I answer this, I might upset some people. If I could live one life again, one day of my life again, what would it be? There's so many. This is gonna sound really sad. Alright, so I'm gonna say a couple of things that have been through my mind, and then I'm gonna land on one. So, one was my wedding day. There, I got married. Just an amazing time. Had such fun. Connecting with all the people that have been involved in my life over the years was just amazing. We had just a sick party. The next one I was going to say was the day that my son was born. I think that was life changing. But then if I have kids in the future, they're going to look at that and say, it's a little bit technical. And then the third one was, I'm a Liverpool fan, so like the 2006 Champions League final was like the greatest game of football that has ever been played. And I think that day, watching that, like the ups and the downs, was incredible. So I'd say one of those three. I'm probably going to be political and pick my wedding day. So let's go with that.
Good. I'm a Liverpool fan as well.
This is it. I knew there was something special about you.
These past few years I've been really enjoying my football. I tune in every single week. Before that, oh my gosh, struggling to get into top four, languishing just above mid-table, all of that. Like, it's been tough.
It really has. Yeah, long may it continue as well. We need it.
Definitely. All right. What gets you excited about life now?
Mostly my son, because I feel like there's such an innocence about childhood and the way that he experiences the world, like the things that he likes to do, getting excited about the food that he eats and the places that he goes and the experiences that he has. I think with age comes cynicism, so we can be quite cynical as old people, but there is none or an absence of that cynicism from kids. So I think trying to see things through his eyes, through his perspective, is something that has really changed my life. And the excitement that he gets gives me excitement as well.
That's nice. All right. And last question, what does the next chapter in your own story look like?
Yeah, really great question again. So I've been thinking about this quite seriously over the last couple of months. So our business year runs from September to August, so we're really starting to plan what we do for the next year, and really is about, for me, understanding my role as the organisation grows. And I think there's this change that happens as any organisation scales from a leadership perspective, to say that you step back a little bit from the front lines, from delivery, and start focusing more on the strategic elements of kind of coordinating and leading the business. So I'm really trying to understand what are the areas that I need to improve on as a leader, What are the ways I need to get better at communicating the vision and trusting other people to help with that vision. As I said, I think people are the greatest asset of any business, and for me it's really about seeking out great people to work alongside, and ensuring that we as an organisation don't lose sight of our purpose, our goals, and essentially our culture, because we want to create a culture that we can role model to the clients that we work with. So yeah, for me the next stage really looks like a lot of personal development and a lot of working on myself.
All right, that's that. Nice. All done. That's a Thousand Voices interview all wrapped up. Thank you. Thank you for coming on.
No, thank you for inviting me. It's been an amazing conversation. Yeah, more power to you and everything that you're trying to do here.
Thank you, for sure. All good, all good. Thank you, man. I really enjoyed the conversation anyway. It's been so good, man. So many different nuggets of things to take away from it. So it's been great, man. Thank you so much. Before we wrap up, if anyone wants to keep up to date with you, with the Equal Group and that kind of thing, how can they keep up to date? And do you have any final words you want to say as well?
Yeah, I'll start with final words. I think final words, yeah, just be intentional about creating the world that you want to live in. I think that's something that we sometimes get told growing up, but probably don't get told enough when we're grown and in positions to do it. So yeah, I think we have to be really intentional about how we live life. In terms of connecting, I'm like super rubbish on social media, but I guess I'm a little bit more active on LinkedIn. So look me up on LinkedIn. But the Equal Group is amazing at social media. So you can follow the Equal Group everywhere. So at the Equal Group on Twitter, LinkedIn, and what's the other one? Instagram. Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. Yeah, so everywhere at the Equal Group.
All right, nice. That's that. So once again, thank you for coming to the podcast. Very much appreciated it. But that's that for now. So everybody listening, thank you for tuning in. This is 1000 Voices. We had Mac, the founder of the Equal Group. And for now, we're out. Okay, great. That's the interview done. Thank you for tuning in. And we really hope that you've enjoyed this interview today. As always, it's great to hear back from the community, and feel free to leave us a comment, a review, a rating, wherever it is listening to this. Just let us know what you thought about this interview. As always, the next podcast is going to be released next week, Tuesday. So follow us on all our social media pages at 1000 Voices UK in order to keep up to date with that before it drops. And if you haven't already, subscribe to us on your preferred podcasting platform and or on YouTube as well, because we'll be dropping the visuals there. But that's that for now, people. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time, this is 1000 Voices, and we're out.